Well, good morning, everybody. I love the full house. Thank you, Mary. Appreciate the introduction. And I'd also like to thank Norma and Alan Gordon, who actually developed this presentation, but graciously allowed me to present it to you today. I hope that we have an informative discussion about native plants and some considerations maybe for replacing the non-natives that you currently might have in your yard or landscape. And I'll go through some scenarios that, you know, if they grow well in sun or shade or what have you, you know, maybe something that you could consider replacing it with. I was not aware until I started preparing for this that we had 12 native orchids in the Pacific Northwest. And one of them is shown on the slide above me on the lower right. It is the giant rattlesnake orchid or giant rattlesnake plantain. And it actually can be found at Goldsboro Preserve. I don't know if any of you are hikers or not. I'm an avid hiker, and when I was looking at this presentation, I thought, well, I've never been to Goldsboro Preserve, even though I'm a hiker. And so I went. I was not able to find the plant, but I plan on going back and seeing if I can find it. So I'll tell you a little bit about the rattlesnake orchid. The reason it's called rattlesnake orchid is because the leaves can resemble the skin of a rattlesnake. And some of the reading that I've done said that the natives may have used it if they got bit by a rattlesnake to help remedy it, but I suggest that you just immediately call 911. They're easier to grow than you might think. They're perennials. They live 2 or more years. They have a nice white flower that comes off that erect stalk. And I think it is a fantastic introduction slide that shows you how awesome natives can be and how fun, because, you know, who would ever thought that we could grow an orchid right like this out in our yard. So I think they're the rock stars of our landscape. Okay, next here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about replacing some non-natives with some natives. Like I said, there's going to be about 8 slides talking about some ground covers, some shrubs, some trailers, climbers, trees, and then I'll show you kind of a counter slide that is a native that you might consider using instead. So sometimes, even though these natives are growing all around us, you know, out in the woods, you see them all the time when you go on walks or hikes. When we walk into the nursery, it's not something that we normally see. We kind of see some of these other things, and you know, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store, and I get so excited I just start picking stuff out. But you know, some of the natives are really beneficial and a lot easier maintenance. So next time you walk into a nursery, keep that in mind. And maybe after this presentation, you'll. All right, so why use natives? Usually they are more drought tolerant once they get established than the non-natives. They're healthier, they can be more disease resistant, which means they're easier to grow and maintain. We've got some pretty dry summers and harsh winters sometimes, and the natives are, you know, there are local plants, and so they're just more adapted to our geology, our climate, our soil. So that's why sometimes they can thrive more than a non-native that you might purchase at the nursery. Okay, so improve wildlife habitat. The native plants feed our threatened bees and birds. So they kind of grew up together, right? So they're just used to the plants that normally grow in these areas. So kind of fun if you want to introduce, you know, certain bees or butterflies or whatever. They will be attracted to many of these natives. Another important reason is our city governments and counties and the state of Washington spend over $1 billion a year to get rid of some of these really highly invasive plants. So just something else to consider. All right, and then native plants are beautiful and unique to our region. So if you've got people coming in from out of town visiting and they walk through your yard and landscape and they're like, oh my gosh, how do you have an orchid growing in your yard? Well, you know, it's because you're using your natives and they're not used to seeing them. So it's kind of fun. Okay, so the first slide, we're going to talk about non-native perennials that bloom in the spring. Okay, so the non-native Labrador violets are commonly used throughout the United States. They are pretty plants, beautiful flower, but they're highly invasive and will kind of start getting away from you, as many of these plants that we're going to talk about today will do. Okay, and who doesn't have creeping Jenny, right? I'm the perfect person to give this talk because almost every non-native that's in here, I think I have. So I would guess that everybody's got a little creeping Jenny in their yard, and I really like it in hanging baskets. I think it adds nice texture and color, and I also put them in my container, my large containers. Well, I've got a large container in the back patio, and the creeping Jenny grew over and then down, and now pretty soon it's growing through my pavers on my back patio, and so I'm going to have a little bit of work to do this spring, get rid of it. So couple others, we've got Cilia, Spanish bluebells. I see a lot of that around here. Typically the deer don't eat these because they have a little bit of toxin in them. So maybe that's why people plant them, I don't know, but I didn't know that ivy leaf cyclamen could be invasive as well. So, you know, I would say if you want these, and I can see why they're beautiful, maybe consider, you know, putting them in a container or something, because they are nutrient thieves and they will slowly keep other plants that they're planted adjacent to from thriving. So some suggested alternatives for those spring bloomers. We've got a Western iris, Iris tenax, also known as Oregon iris. We also have camas. These Western iris are native to Northwest Oregon and Southwest Washington. They're beautiful. I love iris. They like full sun. They can do okay in part sun as well. Wet soils typically. And they will spread, but they'll spread slowly. They won't get, you know, out of hand in a hurry. So, and they bloom from May to June. They can be poisonous if you ingest them, but I don't know very many of us that will do that. But anyway, I just thought I would point that out. And it mentions that you might want to wear gloves if you're planting it or transplanting it. Easy to grow, slow spreader. And then the camas that I don't have a picture of is also a perennial, and it'll bloom May through June as well. Okay, and then we got a couple of lovelies here. So this is the Western Trillium. Okay, beautiful. Also called Wake Robin, because it's kind of the first thing that you see in the spring when you go on your walks in the woods, if you do. You know, I never considered putting it in my yard. I know that they are very difficult to transplant though, because they've got a deep root that you don't get it all. But there's native plant societies and native plants, and you can find these there. But Then the inside out flower is also herbaceous perennial. It'll get about 8 to 16 inches tall. It's got real pretty dainty little flowers that are kind of fun. And both of these, the Western Trillium and the inside out flower, are known as ephemerals. So they will, you know, be there, have their flowers and blooms and leaves, but they will eventually die back and disappear. And so if you want to put them in your landscape, you got to kind of keep that in mind, because you know they're going to be there and then they're not. And so it's kind of nice to have maybe a couple other plants in the background. This picture of the inside out flower, you can see that there's some dwarf Oregon grape also there, and some salal. So you know, they're showy, but then they will go away. And then it's important to not cut any of the foliage once they do die back. Don't cut the foliage, because the plant needs it the next year in order to flower. And they will multiply. They'll just do it a little bit more slowly, so they won't come invasive like the other non-natives that we showed in the slide before. Okay, some non-native ground covers that prefer shade. Well, English ivy. Yeah, the dreaded English ivy. You know, that plant is so prolific, and I recently was on a walk with my friend Kitty, and we were walking up to the Catalyst Garden on this trail, and it is just covered, you know, like an acre, it seemed like, of that stuff. And I can't imagine trying to get rid of that. It's also likes to climb. It'll pull down trees. It can be a mess. I know that rats like to kind of hang out in it as well. So there's a great reason to not plant that. I know a lot of people plant it because they think, you know, or they're told, oh, well, it's maintenance free, you won't have to do anything and it'll suppress weeds. Well, all of that is true, but now you're stuck with this thing that is getting away from you and covering up your entire barn, house, whatever.
It destroys the siding.
And destroys the siding. Yeah, you don't want to let it get up on top of your buildings, that's for sure. Another one, periwinkle, Finca minor. It too, you know, people plant it for the same reason. We all have great reasons for planting things that we do, but if you don't keep an eye on things, they're just going to get away from you. And this one's prolific that way as well. So another one that I'm a little less familiar with is the yellow archangel, but I assume that it will do the same thing. So if you have something that you don't really want because it's gotten away from you, you need to make sure that you remove all of the leafy matter and the roots, and do not put it in your compost, because then you'll have it there. And I know there's people that I'm sure none of you in this room are on Zoom, but people will take their stuff and then they go bring it out into the woods and they think, oh, well, it's biodegradable, it's not going to hurt anything in the woods. Well, it just depends on what you're putting out there, right? Because if it's any of these things, it'll start growing out in the woods. And I see examples of it all the time when I go for my walk. So bag it, don't compost it, and you may or may not even be able to take it to your local landfill, because it's beginning to get to be a problem in the landfills as well. So, and then you got to kind of, you know, depending on how big the size was, you got to kind of check it, repeat it. It might take a few times before you can get it all. Okay. Okay. So here's some fun little natives that you might consider instead. So these are shade lovers. We got redwood sorrel, or also known as oxalis. Has a beautiful little dainty flower, little clover type leaf, and it thrives in shade. And In fact, it can photosynthesize in 1/200th of full sunlight. So if you've got shady areas, this is your plant. Another fun one is the starflower, and makes beautiful dainty ground cover. And both of these plants are also ephemeral. So they will eventually do their thing and then they will go away. So you might, you know, have something else there as well. They will disappear by winter, but they'll make a stunning comeback in the spring without you doing anything. Okay. Another one that you guys might recognize, this is the dwarf Oregon grape. It's all over the place out in our forests, and has flowers, yellow flowers that the bees love, and it's also got a little fruiting body that some of the local animals love as well. Deer won't munch on the dwarf Oregon grape though, so if you want something that isn't attractive to deer, then this is a great suggestion for you. And some people plant this maybe close to or near their fruit trees to attract the bees originally to the dwarf Oregon grape, and then they'll go from there and hopefully up to your fruit trees and pollinate those. You can also use ferns as some ground cover. So the two that are up on the screen right now are deer fern and sword fern. So the deer fern is kind of fun because it has a green frond, but then it also shoots up kind of a brown leathery frond, and you know, just adds a little different texture and color to your garden, I guess. And if you, I mean, to me, when I see this in somebody's garden or landscaping, it just is like, wow, it kind of just naturalizes everything, you know, because a lot of times you don't see it in people's yards. So sword fern's pretty tough. Let's see, the deer fern likes to be under the canopy, some sort of shade. And that's why when you're out in the woods walking, you usually will see it there. Same thing with the sword fern. But the sword fern's pretty resilient and can take, you know, some droughty conditions as well. So that's what's kind of cool about natives is they need less water. So you're not out there all the time having to irrigate. But that doesn't mean when we had the 115-degree heat dome that they're not going to feel it, right? So just depends on what the conditions are. So a couple other ferns, oak fern and maidenhair fern, both a little bit more on the dainty side, adds some nice contrast. And these two they're not evergreen, so they will die back eventually. The oak fern will turn a little bit color, you know, if you will. We're not talking East Coast color, we're talking, you know, yellow to brown kind of a thing, but adds a little bit of contrast in the fall. And let's see. And I love the maidenhair fern. They really like fairly moist conditions though. So if you happen to be on a trail and you notice on the side of the trail, there's maidenhair ferns coming out, and there's also probably some water seeping out of the side of the trail as well. So that's where you can see that. So there are like over 40 different species of fern here in the Pacific Northwest, right? And some of them prefer shade or can do both, and some of them are a little bit more sun loving. So we could probably spend a whole day just talking about ferns, but I just wanted to mention these few to you guys. And I think that the natives used to use the little black stipe in that maidenhair fern for baskets. So kind of fun. All right, some non-native ground covers that prefer partial and full sun. St. John's wort, popular sun-loving ground cover. They can become invasive though and choke out anything that's growing adjacent to it, and can just start taking things over. And then I think this is a beautiful plant, chameleon plant. I can understand why people would want to put it in their yard. I mean, look at all the different colors we have on the leaves and the pretty flower. Unfortunately, it really loves our wet soils and very aggressive and can rapidly replace any of your natives that you may have growing next to it, or some of your non-natives you have growing next to it. So again, you know, this presentation isn't meant to shame you because you have non-natives in your yard. It's really just to point out, if you do and you're tired of them always getting away from you or having to prune them or water them and what have you, then you need to be careful and you need to watch where they are, and you know, keep them corralled, put them in a harder place, maybe in your yard where there's poor soils, or you know, along your driveway or something where it's, you might have some gravel or something. You know, make them work for it, I guess, and then they won't get as far away from you. Or containerize them, that's another option. Or use a native. Okay, so native ground covers, partial and full sun, kinnikinick. Again, you can see all this fun stuff when you're out on your walks. Attractive, low-growing, drought-tolerant, evergreen ground cover, even in poor soils, okay? So Mason County has some poor soil, a lot of rocky soil, but the kinnikinick seems to do okay in it. The birds love the berries, and the bees, it's a great bee plant. The bees love this plant. Little urn-shaped flower, and the bee just fits right into it and can easily find nectar. Another nice local here is gray rush. It's we have many native rushes to the Pacific Northwest. This elk blue, the one that's pictured, is a good example of a nativar, and a nativar is just a cultivar of a native plant. Okay, so rushes like to be near water. The seeds from the flowers attract birds. This particular plant can handle moist or drought conditions once it's gotten established. It's just real pretty too. I just love the color in it. All right, so we've got this plant here is called stone crop. It is a sedum, one of our local sedums, does really well here. It survives our cold, our wet climate very well. It will spread, but it won't, you know, get out of control. And the bees love this flower, love this flower. And it's got kind of a gray green leaf, so kind of fun in the garden to kind of switch things up. Bunchberry, if it looks like a dogwood, it's because it's related. So the flower, very dogwood looking like, and the leaves, same thing. It prefers damp, dappled shade under deciduous or evergreen trees, and it is semi-evergreen. It'll get to be about 8 inches tall, forms kind of a nice mat, and cool, moist, acidic soils, which is what we have around here. This is kind of fun too. Some people use this as a ground cover. This is the blue-eyed grass. It's not real tall. Lovely ground cover, will pop up and surprise you with its amazing colors. I am kind of partial to iris, which this is more related to an iris than grass. And so I'm probably going to look into this one a little bit more. It's a perennial, likes moist grassy areas, well-drained soils, flowers from March to July. and then it'll die back and reappear next spring, but it's dormant in the summer. All right. Okay, here's some trailing plants that some of us plant in our yard and then sometimes wish we didn't. But, you know, pretty flower, and people plant it to grow over their arbor maybe, or a fence or something like that. But it'll get away from you and it can be very destructive. It can pull up your foundation. It escapes into nearby parks or forests if you happen to live near either of those. So you have to be very careful with that. Another one, Traveler's Joy, Old Man's Beard. It's a clematis, so it likes to climb. It's on Washington State's noxious weed list. The seeds can spread airborne pretty easily and resprout, you know, and then I think also if you cut the stem, it can sprout from the stem too, kind of like Japanese knotweed, if any of you are familiar with that horrible plant, please. That stuff, you know, you can cut it back in your yard and then a piece goes down the stream and it'll attach to the bank and then start there as well. So that is a crazy invasive plant. Okay, I think there's something else here. Oops. Here we go. Okay, people plant or have honeysuckle because birds and bees love it, right? And these shown here are two native honeysuckles, Japanese honeysuckle and the Tartarian honeysuckle. They're both considered invasive and slightly noxious plants. They just get away from you quicker than you want them to. They can deplete soil moisture and release a chemical that inhibits the growth of other plants. So that's their little competitive mechanism. That's called allelopathic when that happens. We have some native honeysuckles that you might consider instead. Okay, so beautiful. You know, look at the hummingbird right there. It's happy. So our native orange honeysuckle produces a red to orange flower in mid to late spring. It's heavily used by hummingbirds and produces berries for other birds and animals. It hosts butterflies in two different ways, provides nectar for the butterfly and also hosts the butterfly larvae. It also has a trailing stem, but more easily controlled, won't get away like those two non-natives that were shown in the previous slide. All right, we got trailing snowberry. So this is also out in our native forests right now on this fairly dark day. All you'll see are the little white berries, and that's why it's called snowberry, okay? The leaves aren't on it at this time. Don't eat it, not good for you, but they're kind of fun. And once it gets into the spring and the summer, they'll be fuller, and so, you know, can provide kind of a nice backdrop in your landscape. And then this also called waxberry, and they have a flower on them as well. And hummingbirds do come to this plant. Then we've got this one. This is called twinberry. Large shrubby native honeysuckle with yellow tubular blossoms, also attractive to hummingbirds. Birds feed on the ripe blackberries that they have, and it's pretty versatile plant. It can grow in sun and shade. It does like wet soils and can help with erosion control. Okay, we got some non-native flowering shrubs that bloom in the spring. Well, lilac. I also have lilac in my yard. I like it. I like the purple flowers. I like the fragrance, but it doesn't last very long, you know, maybe 3 weeks. And then there's also Forsythia, same kind of a thing, yellow flower though. And from what the authors, you know, are probably the ones that did all the research on this, they say its main virtue is the small yellow flower it produces in late winter for 3 to 4 weeks. But wildlife does not use any part of this shrub. So, you know, just depends on what you're trying to do in your garden. And if you want to have things in your garden that the birds and the bees go after more, then there's probably better things to consider than these two. All right, and here's a couple of them. So blue blossom, it's a ceanothus, also known as deer brush, California lilac. It's an evergreen plant that is native to our area. The one shown here is a varietal called Victoria, very hardy cultivar, sold locally, does well in the Pacific Northwest. And most ceanothuses are butterfly and bee magnets. So it does have a little bit of fragrance to it too, prefers full sun. And then the red stem ceanothus, and there's another ceanothus, Ceanothus rostratus, which is great ground cover for some sunny spots. And one of my favorites, red flowering currant. It's a ribes. You see this out in the woods, and hummingbirds love it. It is deciduous, so the leaves will fall off, but the first thing you're going to see in the spring are actually the flowers. So nice showy plant, and birds and the bees love it. It also produces a blueberry in late summer, which provides food for the birds and other mammals. And there's several cultivars of the currant. The one that's shown here is the King Edward VII, which does real well around here. So I've been throwing around a couple of terms or some jargon, and I don't want to get too hung up on this slide, but since it's brought up throughout this presentation, I thought that we should include it. And I think Jeannie talked about a couple of these words as well. So there's many native varieties, cultivars, and hybrids that work extremely well in our landscape. So you don't necessarily have to be a purist about you know, what you have. And a variety is just a natural variation of a species. Variants become better adapted to their surroundings in order for them to survive, however that is, right? It might mean that they put a showier flower or a different color flower to attract pollinators. So an example of this would be our native yellow flowered version of the native honeysuckle that we have. And then a cultivar is simply a cultivated variety of a plant. Generally, they're developed by university or industry in plant breeding programs. And the cultivars are selected for a special trait. You know, it could be size. Maybe you don't want a real tall tree, but you want more of a shrubby bush. Well, we're going to show you a Pinus contorta in a couple more slides. That would be an example of this. Or like short season tomatoes. And who doesn't love those around here, right? Or we wouldn't be eating tomatoes out of our garden. So anyway, yeah, don't want to get you hung up on it. Just know that there's some different definitions. And I think these presentations are going to be available for folks too. So, okay, on to some non-native evergreen shrubs and trees with berries. Like I said, I have this in my yard as well. I don't pay much attention to it. It's just kind of over on the side along our fence, but I do visit it once a year, right around the holidays, because I put a little bit in the house. So it produces a you know, attractive fruit that the birds will ingest, and then they'll drop it someplace in the forest, and then all of a sudden, so you know, the holly isn't native. So if you're walking through the woods and you see holly, they're not native. It's because they got deposited there by a bird. Okay, and then another one that has some showy berries, rock spray, cotton ester. It's not cotton Easter, it's cotton ester. Very invasive cascading shrub. It you know, will go down and then it'll touch the ground and it'll root there. So it can be pretty invasive that way. The seeds also dispersed by birds, and actually there are no redeeming virtues of this plant unless you love to prune. Okay, so check out the next slide because we've got some alternatives for you. And here they are. Okay, well, we talked about the dwarf Oregon grape. Well, there's a taller version, tall Oregon grape.
How tall?
They can get up to 4 feet, maybe a little taller, you know. I'm about 5'2" on a good day, so they can get as tall as me, I guess. I see more of the dwarf Oregon grape where I walk, but I know there's some of this along Cole Road as I'm heading into town. Great alternative if you want a little taller plant to provide that color with the berries. Those are pretty nice color berries, and again, those flowers are just loved by the birds and the bees, especially the bees. So the deer don't like it. I think I mentioned that, and it will tolerate wet and dry conditions. And the berries are used by wildlife, and you can also make jam out of them. Another native with berries is the evergreen huckleberry. Again, that urn-shaped flower, the bees fit really nicely into it, and the berries are pretty good. I know bears like the berries. I like the berries, but whenever I'm out in the woods in the summer, I'm always just kind of looking where I'm at because I know the bears like the berries. We also have a red huckleberry that is not evergreen, so it's deciduous, and they produce a red berry that are also edible, and you can make jam out of. This evergreen huckleberry will withstand pruning, so if it starts, you know, going one way and you don't really want it to go one way, you just, you know, prune it off a little bit. It's a great all-around landscape shrub. So. All right, some more non-natives that folks might have in their yard. Let's just go back to this one here. Viburnum, you know, it's a nice plant because it kind of takes up some big space and has a pretty flower, but if you don't stay on it, it's gonna start taking over your yard, right? So another one, and a lot of times we plant these things kind of for hedges or to, you know, maybe not look at our neighbor's yard or whatever. And it's understandable. They provide that purpose. There's just no other really redeeming values to wildlife, and can be invasive a little bit too. So, you know, Master Gardeners is all about promoting natives when we can, and so that's what we're doing, and we're going to show you some ones that you can consider instead of those. So we have a Pacific yew is native. Now, I've never considered this as to put in my yard because I'm mostly used to seeing it out in the woods, and it's kind of you don't see it real frequently, and you have to kind of know what you're looking for too, because it resembles a hemlock. And then you get up closer to it and you're like, well, no, those needles look more like a redwood, but it's neither of those. It's Pacific yew, but it looks like it will provide a little bit of a hedge if you were to kind of keep it pruned. So these things typically in the woods don't get too tall, but they can get up to 50 feet. So you got to give that consideration if that, if you want that in your yard. Suitable in shade or sun. They do grow under the understory of taller trees though out in the wild. You may know that this plant produces Taxol, which was used in chemotherapy drugs for breast, ovarian, and lung cancer. So real pretty bark. The animals like it because it can provide some shelter. And the seeds though of these are poisonous. So if you've got small children, don't recommend this in your yard. Okay, we got shore pine. Okay, Pinus contorta. Now this is Pinus contorta contorta. So it is something that it's a varietal that has been meant to be a dwarf. Otherwise, if you just had Pinus contorta in your yard, it's a lumber species in some sorts. Grows on the coast in the Pacific Northwest, and then it's got a varietal that grows east of here, or that's latifolia, that is lodgepole pine, right? So kind of fun though to have a conifer that doesn't get over 2 or 3 feet tall on its own without you having to prune it. And this is just spectacular, I believe. This is it's a native in Oregon, and so it's Pinus contorta latifolia, but it has a beautiful yellow leaf in the winter, and this is not deciduous. This is an evergreen tree, so the needles will not fall off of this. So it's a selection of our native shore pine that are discovered in the mountains of Oregon and named after one of the chiefs of the Nez Perce. And I think I'm going to look into this one as well. So good winter shelter for birds and other small critters, but absolutely spectacular. Okay, well, I'm not going to spend tons of time on our native rhododendron because we've spent most of our morning talking about it, but a talk on native plants wouldn't be complete if we didn't at least mention it. So here we have rhododendron macifolium, and the gals before me spent a lot of time on it. So I won't. We did mention it as Washington State's flower, and I notice on mine that it attracts more bumblebees than it does regular bees. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but some of the reading that I've done when I was reading about this is the reason for that, or the reason maybe, is that it does produce a little bit of a toxin that our honeybees don't prefer. And so the bumblebees can handle it and it's no problem for them. But our regular bees don't seem to prefer it. Now, I also read something that says some do and some don't. So, what do you know? I just thought it was just kind of interesting. And then we've got something that maybe you're not as familiar with. And oh, by the way, so I just want you to know on this one, I'm a radical pruner when it comes to this. Jeannie mentioned that, to take a third off. Well, it was kind of obstructing my view. I have a peekaboo view of the water, and it was getting very, very big. And so I was gonna just remove it actually. And I thought, well, heck, I'll just cut it back. Well, I cut it back pretty heavily, like maybe a foot. It came back. It looks, you couldn't tell. And it's been about 4 or 5 years and you couldn't tell. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm a radical pruner, so don't do what I say. No. Okay, Pacific Ninebark, real pretty. The birds like this, the berries, the bees love the flower, and it's called ninebark because of the layered bark that's shown here in this. There's also a cultivar of the Pacific Ninebark that has a different colored leaf, which is kind of fun. So if you kind of wanted to jazz it up a little bit, you could do that. And let's see if there's anything else. So spring flowers, berries later in the season. This cultivar does like part to full sun. And it's a magnet for wildlife and bees. Okay. So if you want something taller that has maybe some fall color, you might be familiar with this Norway maple. I think it was growing on Railroad Avenue here in downtown Shelton. It will get really tall though, and with some of our windy winter weather that we have, you know, branches can break off and whatnot. I know I'm not going to deny that the colors in the fall aren't spectacular. And then burning bush, it can get to be about 10 feet tall, 12 feet tall. Fabulous fall color. It's originally from Asia, but in the eastern United States anyway, it started to be invasive there. And it's, you know, kind of like the lilac or the forsythia. It just puts on a show, but not for very long. And then all of a sudden you're just looking at a bunch of pile of sticks or something. So couple of suggestions for you to replace those trees or taller shrubs. Western serviceberry, not real known. It will eventually grow into a small tree though, if that's what you want. It's got white spring flowers that are kind of unusual. The berries make delicious jam. I have not eaten a serviceberry, so I don't know what it tastes like. But they must taste pretty good because it says you got to beat the wildlife to them. So they like them. And it will provide that autumn color that you might be going after there. And they are deciduous, so they will lose their leaves. And then we've got our vine maple, Acer. It is prolific around here. As a forester, I used to spend a lot of time trying to get rid of this because it was competing with our Douglas fir, but I've grown to have more of an appreciation for it. I love the fall colors. In fact, I remember driving out in the woods and, you know, it would just be late summer and all of a sudden I would see the vine maple already starting to turn and I would just be like, oh, I don't want my summer to be over yet. So it has multiple branches, so, you know, can take up some more space if that's what you want. And delicate branches, so in our winter storms, they won't break off as much. And you know, you can use it as an understory, and everything likes the entire tree. The entire tree, including the seeds used by wildlife, nesting, shelter, nectar, you name it. So let's see, I think that's it. I hope that you have a little bit more appreciation for our natives and know that they can replace some of your non-natives if you're tired of watering, pruning, you know, eradicating. So I want to thank Norma and Alan again for creating this presentation, and thank you guys. You've been a great audience. So,
Question.
yes, sir.
You didn't mention the most invasive species out in my yard. Salal.
Salau.
Yeah,
Huh, well, that's a native, so I'm probably not gonna mention.
but it's invasive. Isn't it?
Well, I see it, it is very prolific out in the woods. Now, in your yard, do you see it getting more and more and more?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Major.
yeah, and it's tough to get rid of too.
I think there's only one plant and he just throws fruits throughout the entire Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. One mother plant started in your yard.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I gotta get your number. We gotta cut down that plant.
Yes,
You say to get rid of that English laurel. How do you get rid of the English laurel?
well, that's a good question. They're hard to get rid of, and that's why I think the authors put them in this presentation. So chainsaw probably.
I was in the woods just recently and I saw in a forest area, it looked like something growing up a tree.
Yeah.
At first I thought it was toilet paper, but it was like little white balls of flowers. It was kind of like that
The wax.
Pacific 90s bark. Is that
Oh.
a tree?
I don't think any bark does.
It had a bunch of light.
Could have it been the flowers on the English or clematis?
Yeah,
In full bloom.
yeah. But it might be a non-native that got into the forest. Okay, that would be great. Yeah, that would be helpful.
What's a good source of providing plants if you want to establish something?
So the question was, what's a good source to buy natives if you want them in your yard? I do not have a list of nurseries, but I know that there is a native Washington State Native Plant Society, and I'm sure that they would be more than happy to direct you in the right place.
Also,
So,
I'll just say we have a plant sale coming May 19th and 20th. We will have some natives in that sale. And on February 11th, Erica Gutman is going to be our speaker. And she's so well known in the South Sound for native plant restoration. And she'll give you some really good ideas. She started Native Plant Salvage.
awesome.
She could bring some green.
I went to a native plant nursery somewhere in the Port Orchard area. I went to a few years back.
Okay, I'm sure some of our local nurseries probably have sections where they just have natives, yeah.
And Erica just suggested the conservation district, whatever county that you're in.
Very good suggestion, yeah, that's what they do. Yeah, okay, great. Well, sorry I held you up a little bit, but thank you for being here and thank you Zoomers.